Hello, and welcome to Dreamy Tales, a sanctuary where everyone can experience calm and a touch of magic before gently drifting into sleep. Tonight, we invite you on another enchanting journey, a story that helps soothe the mind and nurture a sense of peace. Before we begin, let's take a moment to prepare our bodies and minds for a comforting, restorative rest. Make yourself cozy, and with each slow inhale and long exhale, let the cares of the day gradually slip away. It's not always easy to step back from the day's demands, especially as night falls. Yet, remember, the less we worry about how quickly we'll fall asleep, the simpler it is for our minds to release any remaining tension. Allow the gentle flow of your breathing to wash away lingering concerns, and let the story ahead guide you into a state of deep relaxation. Now, settle in, and let the dreamy atmosphere softly wrap around you. Enjoy this story, and may you drift into a peaceful, restful slumber here on Dreamy Tales. There was a merchant named Laurent who had risked his entire fortune on a fleet of ships, only to lose them all at sea. As a widower, he didn't have to break the news to a wife, but he did have 6 children who were accustomed to a life of luxury. When the debts came due and word spread that the family was destitute, most of them struggled to cope. With each passing day and no sign of the ships, Laurent had to start selling off their elegant furniture, their carriage, and even his daughter's jewelry and lavish dresses. They had to give up their grand house and relocate to a cottage on the outskirts of town. Laurent was often away, seeking investors and trying to rebuild his business. Meanwhile, his 3 boys and 3 girls, now practically adults, were left to manage the household. The boys and older girls, used to a life of leisure, were not very helpful with practical tasks. The youngest daughter, Camille, took on the responsibilities willingly. Whether due to her age or her gentle nature, Camille was the most willing to learn how to run a household. Camille, well liked by the villagers, sought guidance on tasks like baking, sewing, gardening, and raising chickens. Initially cautious, the villagers grew fond of her eagerness to learn and work hard. Over time, she became the pillar of Laurent's household. While the older siblings struggled to come to terms with their new reality, Camille ensured the home was orderly and meals were on the table. Nearly 2 years into this lifestyle, Laurent received news that one of his lost ships had returned to port with most of its cargo intact. The family celebrated this unexpected turn of events. The older siblings were eager to leave their life among the villagers behind. Camille was happy for their joy, but she had grown fond of their modest cottage, with its neat garden and the comforting smell of freshly baked bread. While she was relieved to see her family content, she wasn't sure if she wanted to return to their former life of idleness. She had discovered a love for being helpful and purposeful. In order to retrieve his property, Laurent had to journey to the port on horseback, a trip that would take a couple of days. Once there, he could organize the proper distribution of his reclaimed wealth and hire a comfortable coach for the journey back home. In anticipation of their improved circumstances, He inquired with each of his children about their desired gifts from the city. The older siblings requested luxury items: silk shoes with sparkling buckles, hats with intricate decorations, velvet capes, bears, and jewels. Camille, however, remained silent, appearing deep in thought about her desired gift. When her father prompted her to speak, she hesitated briefly before expressing, "Honestly, Father, I have always longed to see a rose. They do not grow in our region, and they are so rare and costly. If you could bring me a single rose in any color, that would be wonderful." He chuckled at his youngest daughter's peculiar request, but readily agreed. Privately, he planned to also bring her a necklace or some other trinket to accompany the flower. On the morning of his departure, the weather was pleasant. Camille took care to pack his saddlebag with provisions for the journey, and bid him farewell with a slightly teary smile. The others were more nonchalant. They were accustomed to their father's travels and were solely interested in the gifts they anticipated upon his return. As he rode off down the sunlit forest path, Camille stood alone in front of the cottage until he vanished from sight. She had a strange sense of unease, but chose to remain silent. After all, their fortunes seemed to have taken a positive turn. While Laurent's children awaited his return at the cottage, he steadily made his way to the port city, filled with hope of regaining his wealth and status. It was true that he had suffered significant losses. Nevertheless, with the cargo aboard the ship, he could start a new business, possibly leading to a new fleet of ships. His mind was brimming with visions of the spices, silks, and other goods he could import in the future. Thus, it was crushing for him to arrive and discover his aspirations shattered. Indeed, the ship had returned with most of its cargo intact. However, news of his good fortune had swiftly spread, prompting his numerous creditors to take immediate action. By the time Laurent arrived to claim his possessions, they had already been distributed to settle his many debts. Despite his efforts to negotiate extensions with various merchants to no avail, he found himself debt-free but empty-handed by day's end. There was no capital left for investment, and certainly no funds for the gifts pledged to his family. He was so disheartened that he didn't even want to stay in the city overnight. Without properly provisioning himself, considering the weather, or sending any correspondence ahead of him, Laurent mounted his tired horse again and rode out of town, heading back down the provincial road that had brought him to the port that morning. Laurent was a few hours outside of the city when darkness fell and a storm descended. Lightning and thunder crashed all around him, and the wind gusted mercilessly, blowing limbs off the trees. Laurent's horse became frightened and bolted away from the main road, taking him into an unfamiliar forest. Realizing too late that he had been foolish to undertake this nighttime journey, Laurent began searching in the gusting wind for any sort of shelter, such as a cave. How long his horse wandered through the howling gale, he did not know. Finally, he saw a tall stone wall arise before him. He urged the horse onward, hoping he had reached a house where he might shelter. Arriving at the forbidding wall of rock, he saw that it was not a house. It was the wall around an estate. A tall and imposing iron gate stood ever so slightly open. Having no time for good manners, Laurent dismounted and pushed the heavy swinging gate wider to pull his horse through. Together, they slowly headed up a paved walkway that receded ahead of them into the swirling darkness. With leaves flying all around and rain pelting him from all sides, Laurent could barely see the massive structure that emerged ahead of him in the wicked gloom. It was a mansion, to be sure. Although his visibility was limited, he could see it had a grand approach and many large rooms with tall windows. It was a very intimidating place for a person to arrive uninvited. But he had no choice. He feared he could not survive the night without a roof over his head. Tying his horse up safely in a sheltered alcove, he walked to the massive front door and lifted the iron door knocker. He let it fall, hearing the sound echo through the gloom, as if in response to the thunder. When there was no answer, he took a deep breath and pushed the door inward with all his weight. It gave, and he found himself almost falling onto the floor of a grand entryway. Laurent lay on the cold flagstones for a moment, regaining his breath in the eerie stillness. He could still hear the rain lashing the front steps through the crack in the tall door, and thought to himself how glad he was that he had found shelter for his horse. Rising in the semi-darkness, he appeared about him. He was in a grand reception area with a curved staircase ascending on either side. Suits of armor stood sentinel here and there. Ahead of him, there was a set of richly carved double doors. The silence within the house was profound, with a light glowing around the cracks of the doors in front of him, making it possible to hear a pin drop. After a few half-hearted attempts to call out to the occupants, he took a deep breath and walked towards the lighted room, slowly pushing the doors open. Inside, he found a room with a roaring fire in the cavernous hearth, a table set for one with simple dishes, a carafe, and a large drinking glass spread across it. The room also contained upholstered chairs and tables stacked with books. Despite the comfortable surroundings, there was no sign of the owner. Awkwardly, Laurent sat down on one of the armchairs and waited for a few moments. Unable to resist the temptation of the dinner laid out on the table, he eventually seated himself and began to eat, starting with a slice of bread and eventually finishing the entire meal. As he enjoyed the food and drink, he convinced himself that the owner must be away and that he would explain himself in the morning. After finishing the meal and the contents of the carafe, he leaned back in his chair, feeling content, and drifted off to sleep. He slept through the night without dreaming, and upon waking in the morning, he realized that the fire had burned out, and the plates and glasses from the night before were still on the table. It seemed that the owner had not returned home yet. Feeling embarrassed for intruding, Laurent decided to quietly leave the house rather than wait for the owner's return. He reasoned that the dinner would have gone to waste anyway. Rising from the chair, he made his way to the double doors, opening them to let light filter weakly into the entryway, illuminating the austere hallway more clearly than the night before. Entering the foyer cautiously, he found himself carefully navigating between the vigilant suits of armor, half expecting them to spring to life and block his way. Surveying the twin carving staircases, he noticed the neglected and fussy carpet runners, giving the impression that nobody had inhabited the place for a while. Approaching the massive front door, he grasped the handles, pulled with all his strength, and slowly pushed it open, revealing a misty courtyard outside. After slipping through the crack and shutting it behind him, he adjusted his waistcoat, trying to regain composure. Although leaving his forbidding refuge felt unsettling, he resolved to move past this humiliating experience. Hurrying back to the alcove where he had left his horse tied up the previous night, he was relieved to find her in good condition. Retrieving an apple from his saddlebag, a leftover from the supplies Camille had packed, he fed it to her. Untying the horse, he led her quietly along the stone path he had traversed in the blustery wind the night before. Glancing back, he saw the imposing mansion looming in the growing daylight. The vast chateau, long, beige and rectangular, featured a central section flanked by identical wings on each side. The tall, narrow windows on the two large floors gave the building a regimented appearance, seemingly peering down at him. The thickly populated chimneys adorned the sloping tiled roof. Turning away from the sight of the grand chateau, he guided the horse toward the front gate, passing the overgrown gardens on either side. Approaching the end of the walkway, he noticed a charming pergola entwined with rose bushes. In the center of a circular seating area stood a rose bush adorned with the most exquisite pink roses he had ever seen. Remembering his promise to Camille, he decided to fulfill his commitment to his youngest daughter. With a knife from his bag, he eagerly began cutting the blushing roses from the bush. Realizing that one rose would not suffice to make amends for his sudden return, he resolved to take them all. Engrossed in his task, he failed to hear approaching footsteps. As he stepped back from the now flowerless bush, he sensed a presence watching him. Turning around, he saw a stern-looking figure glaring down at him. Though resembling a human, the being had a wild mane of facial hair and an unusually tall, muscular frame. Clearly caught off guard, the figure, clad in rumpled linen shirt and breeches, seemed to have rushed over in a hurry. His expression conveyed anger. "What do you think you are doing?" he growled loudly, resembling a wolf. Laurent stood frozen, acutely conscious of the bouquet in his left hand. He stammered out an excuse, claiming he believed nobody resided there and assumed the roses wouldn't be missed. With no change in the man's intimidating expression, he weakly added that he had promised roses to his daughter. The man in the linen shirt, with a beastly demeanor, waited in silence, seemingly pondering his next words. Standing tall, he declared, "You took advantage of my hospitality without permission. You dined at my table, you slept in my chair, all of which I was willing to overlook without confrontation. However, you have now taken every bloom from my most cherished rose bush. Each flower holds great personal significance to me, irreplaceable and invaluable. I insist that you find a way to compensate me for this." Laurent's heart sank upon hearing this. He shook his head in resignation, confessing that he had nothing to offer in payment. The stern host regarded him coldly. "In that case, you must work to repay your debt," he stated. "I require workers here at my estate." Laurent stared at him, attempting to propose an alternative. "But, sir," he objected, "I have 6 children at home. I cannot stay here with you. What will happen to them?" Unmoved, the man replied, "Either you work off your debt, or someone from your family must take your place. Take your roses. They hold no value for me now. Go back to your family and make arrangements. I expect you or a replacement to arrive within a week. If you fail to appear, I will come for you." With a fierce glare, the man turned and walked towards the house without looking back. Laurent watched him vanish into the chateau. Feeling he had no choice, he decided to return home and inform his children of his actions. Uncertain of what lay ahead, he knew he had to make provisions for them to manage during his absence. Perhaps, once the man calmed down, he would release Laurent from service promptly. As the storm cleared and daylight emerged, Laurent retraced his steps to the main road and journeyed homeward. Contemplating the news he had to deliver, he rode steadily, but slowly. It was a lovely day. The mist dissipated, and the early autumn sun shone brightly, creating a stark contrast to his heavy heart. The birds sang joyfully, oblivious to the turmoil. Yet Laurent felt apprehensive about the future. He arrived home late that night. His children greeted him with excitement. They were expecting gifts. Opening and closing his saddlebags, they playfully reached around to find the finery he had promised them. With regret, he instead offered each of them a rose. Camille took hers and smelled it with delight, admiring its perfection. But his other 5 children demanded to see their real presents. That night, around the crowded kitchen table, Laurent told his children what had happened on his ill-fated journey to the port city. He related the loss of his remaining fortune, as well as the circumstances leading up to his current obligation to the owner of the mysterious chateau. When he concluded that he would have to return and work off his debt, the 5 oldest siblings were not pleased. They pouted, asking how they were supposed to manage in his absence. Camille alone was silent. She sat at the table with an unreadable expression, lost in thought. Finally, she called for silence. Her siblings looked at her with surprise, as Camille was usually not one to insert her opinion. Camille announced that she would return to the chateau to take her father's place. Laurent's eyes filled with tears. He protested that he could not and would not allow such a thing. However, Camille's sound reasoning was difficult to counter. Father was needed at home to support the family. She, however, could be spared. Furthermore, she did have some household skills and would be able to do whatever cleaning or cooking was allotted to her. No, she concluded, there was not another reasonable solution. She was who would work off the family debt. It took a day or two for Camille to prepare her modest belongings for the journey. As the rose her father brought her began to wilt, she pressed it in a book to dry. She wanted to have a reminder of why she was leaving home, to work for this beastly stranger on a distant and isolated estate. Camille was nervous about leaving behind everything she had known, but she was determined to make her father proud. The morning of Camille's departure dawned bright and clear. She and Laurent packed her things into a small cart that they hitched to their faithful mare. The chateau would be 2 days' walk with the horse pulling the cart. Laurent knew of an inn where they could spend the night along the way. Her 4 remaining siblings gathered in front of the cottage to see them off. Among them, there was a mixture of relief and unspoken admiration. They were glad that they would not be left to fend for themselves for very long. It was a somber journey for Laurent and Camille. The fine weather lasted all the first day, and their night at an inn was uneventful. The second day of their journey turned out to be blustery and gloomy as autumn began to make its presence known in the forest. The first brown leaves had fallen and were being blown across their path, while the wind whistled through the trees. Their trusty mare moved slowly along the road, bringing them closer to their separation. When Laurent noticed the turnoff from the main road that led to the chateau, his heart broke a little more with each step. Sensing her father's despondency, Camille gathered her courage and offered him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, father," she said soothingly. "I am capable. I will manage." He nodded, hoping it would be true. Eventually, they reached the somber entrance of the estate. Laurent knew the time had arrived. Pushing the gate open once more, he guided the horse through the entrance and approached the imposing mansion for the second time. Camille gazed openly at the sight before her. The elaborate, overgrown gardens and the towering, unwelcoming walls of the house were more magnificent than anything she had ever seen. It was overwhelming, yet also striking in its starkness. Coming from a village upbringing, Camille was left speechless by the sheer size of the place and felt deeply the mystery and permanence it exuded. The stones themselves seemed to be in a slumber, as if they had long awaited rediscovery in secret. She pondered the tasks that awaited her, and hoped they were within her capabilities. As the former keeper of a modest cottage, Laurent halted the horse and cart upon reaching the broad front steps. The wind blew at them sideways, as if trying to push them away from the building's entrance. They climbed the steps slowly. Laurent raised the heavy door knocker and let it fall. Father and daughter stood at the steps, waiting for the stern master of the house to appear. To their surprise, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a boy. He seemed to be around 13 years old and was dressed plainly in village attire. Peering out from the opening, he observed the pair with open curiosity. Satisfied with his assessment, he nodded. "Is one of you the new servant, then?" he inquired. Laurent was momentarily surprised, but indicated that he had brought his daughter Camille, who would be working off his debt in his place. The boy nodded, as if this was entirely expected, and pulled hard on the door, gesturing for her to enter. With that, the voice scuttled off into the recesses of the house, presumably to announce that the new servant waited with the wind at her back. Camille walked through the doorway and into her new life. It was an emotional parting for Laurent and Camille, but they both put on a brave face. The faithful mare turned homeward, the sullen skies weighing down on them, and did not look back until they were outside the gates of the chateau. Then, the swaying trees of the forest closed in behind them. Camille stood uncertainly in the echoing hallway. The gray light of the overcast day made its way into the room via tall windows above the door, but it did nothing to create a feeling of warmth. She suppressed a shiver, edging closer to the trunk that held her belongings. She told herself she would need to muster her courage and do her best. After a few minutes, the boy came running back into the hall and announced to her that the Baron had told him to take her to her room. With that, he cheerfully picked up her trunk and began lugging it up the large, curving staircase. Camille followed him, surprised that she was going up instead of down to a kitchen or lower room. Perhaps she would be lodging in the attic. To her surprise, the boy turned down the first grand hallway they padded along, the richly carpeted east wing of the chateau. Their silent steps moved past staring portraits of nobles from bygone eras. It was as if they were a permanent residence, and this strange girl was an unexpected intruder. Camille was so busy looking at them that she almost collided with the boy when he finally stopped in front of a door and pushed it open. Camille followed him inside and was surprised to find herself standing in the most well-appointed bedroom she'd ever seen. It was not overly large, and the furnishings were sober, but the canopied bed, the fine fabrics, and the rich wood trim were very luxurious. While she surveyed the room, noting a cozy window seat and small dressing table, the boy announced and started a fire in the grate. When it was crackling, he stood and dusted off his hands, grinning at her. "I'm Gabriel," he said, "and I help the Baron out around here with this and that. I'm so glad you've come. It does get a bit solitary sometimes, and I could use some help with the day-to-day." Camille wasn't sure how to respond. Although she wondered what exactly the day-to-day was instead, she thanked him for the fire and asked when she would be meeting her new employer. Gabriel informed her that the Baron had indicated he would see her tomorrow and that he'd explain her duties then. For now, the boy would be bringing her a simple supper and hoped she would rest well for the night. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Gabriel left the room and closed the door silently behind him. Camille collected herself and began unpacking her belongings. She hung her clothes in the spacious wardrobe and placed her few books carefully on a side table next to the bed. Opening the top volume, she noticed a pink rose tucked between the pages, which brought a bittersweet smile to her face. After closing the book and setting it aside, she walked over to the window, drew back the heavy drapes, and settled into the plush cushions of the window seat. From there, she had a commanding view of the courtyard, where gardens sprawled untamed along the pathways and up the stone walls surrounding the chateau. Dusk was approaching, and the wind stirred debris across the cobblestone yard, creating small whirlwinds. Dark clouds raced past the emerging moon. Overwhelmed by the journey and the unfamiliarity of her new surroundings, she drifted off briefly, enveloped by the curtains. A knock on the door roused her. Disentangling herself from the window seat, she regulated her breathing and opened the door to find a tray outside, bearing a simple dinner of bread, cheese, soup, and hot tea. Glancing up and down the corridor, she saw no one. Gabriel moved with stealth, that much was evident. Bringing the tray inside, she placed it on a small table near the fireplace. Feeling famished, she devoured every morsel. With little preparation for bed, she pulled back the coverlet, slipped into the cozy embrace of her sheets and pillow, and swiftly succumbed to sleep. During the night, Camille experienced peculiar dreams. She envisioned herself wandering the dim corridors of the chateau, trailing a large dog that vanished into various rooms, only to reappear in the hallway moments later. Attempting to catch up, she arrived at a doorway where the dog had recently disappeared. Peering into the room, instead of the dog, she beheld the back of a man seated at a desk. As the man started to swivel in his chair to face her, she awoke. Sitting up in bed, she observed the dwindling firelight and the morning sun streaming through her window. As her grogginess lifted, there came a knock at her door. Gabriel stood outside with a tray. "Good morning, Miss Mila," he greeted politely. "I've brought you some breakfast." Gesturing toward the entrance, he added, "The Baron wishes to see you in his study once you've finished." Camille nodded at the boy, accepted the tray, and watched him disappear once more. An hour later, Camilla stood nervously at the door of the very room where her father had once eaten his stolen fireside dinner. Camille could hear paper shuffling around inside. She cleared her throat and knocked lightly on the door. The noises stopped, and she heard a chair scraping across the floor. Momentarily, a man with a copious amount of facial hair appeared. His features were unattractively prominent, and his face appeared to wear a natural scowl. He was a truly alarming sight. But Camille took care not to reveal her feelings. He dipped her head politely in greeting. The huge man peered at her appraisingly and nodded his ungainly head in return. Then he gestured for her to be seated in a chair by the fire. He lowered himself into the armchair opposite. "See that you are the one to work off your father's debt," he said. "Are you familiar with basic household tasks such as cleaning and some cooking?" Camille nodded, indicating that she was. The man appeared pleased by this. He lifted a heavy ring of keys off a nearby table. "As you can see, I am very short on help here," he said. "Gabriel takes care of my basic needs. His mother keeps me provisioned with bread, milk, and eggs each day, and he runs errands to town. But there's nobody else to manage the estate other than myself." I'm sure you can tell that by looking around. It's still too much work, just you and Gabriel, but we will make do." He paused, as if waiting for a reply. Camille was aghast at the idea of being the only housekeeper in this huge mansion, but she didn't think there was a point in saying so. The man continued, "These keys will open most rooms in the house, although there is little reason to use many of them. If you need something that Gabriel cannot get for you, please speak to me. Otherwise, I am not particular and would like you to make as many household decisions for yourself as possible. I spend most of my time in my study or in the library." Overwhelmed by the enormity of the job he was giving her, Camille could only nod, indicating that the interview was at an end. He stood abruptly. Camille rose from her seat, took the ancient-looking keys from him, and nodded. Then, as she made her way out of the room, he called after her, "Dinner is at 7 p.m. It would be very sensible if you would join me in the dining room." Camille bobbed her head, thanked him, and left the study. She stood somewhat bewildered in the echoing front hall, feeling at once that she was lost in it, and also that it was closing in on her. Spreading the heavy keys across her open palm, she gazed at them reflectively. She didn't know what doors they opened, but they held a quiet aura of authority about them. She was stirred from her reverie by the sight of Gabriel emerging from the shadows. Grinning brightly in her direction, he asked if she would like a tour. She gratefully accepted, and so her adventure of being the housekeeper at the chateau began. What Camille learned was that the employer lived alone, and had done so for many years due to his fierce appearance, which made the people in the surrounding area fear him. They spread unkind stories and treated him rudely when he appeared in public. Gabriel was the only person who connected him to the outside world. He had started by running errands for the Baron years ago, but he had soon grown to love and appreciate the man behind the unapproachable facade. He assured Camille that the Baron's bark was worse than his bite. Now, Gabriel spent every day at the house, tending to whatever necessities he could. At night, he returned to his family's modest home on the outskirts of town. "Truly, miss," he insisted, "the Baron is a fair and kind-hearted man." Gabriel gave Camille a tour of the numerous rooms and corridors of the entire chateau, which was neglected in most areas. Along the dim hallways were unused bedrooms, draped in dust sheets. The fireplaces were cold. Some rooms had not been used for decades or even centuries. Furniture and belongings were stacked high in those places, covered in cobwebs. The windows barely let in light from outside due to years of grime coating the glass. As Camille discovered, there were only a few rooms that were used regularly, and she needed to focus on cleaning and organizing those. These included the kitchen, the Baron's study, and the front entryway. However, the most remarkable room was the library. Gabriel allowed Camille to peek into the library while the Baron was occupied elsewhere, and she was amazed by what she saw. A vast room with lofty ceilings and gold accents unfolded before her. Bookcases extended all the way to the ceiling, lining every wall, except where there were windows. Rolling ladders stood at each end of the room, ready to glide across the bookcases and allow access to any volume. The number of volumes seemed countless, with spines in various colors like crimson, forest green, navy blue, and brown. Each book beckoned to be taken off the shelf and perused at leisure. Camille, an enthusiastic reader of the few books she had owned during her father's financial downfall, had never encountered or even imagined a collection like this one. According to Gabriel, the Baron spent a significant amount of time in the library, and it certainly appeared to be true. Tables throughout this opulent sanctuary were piled with books open to specific pages or grouped together, while well-worn leather armchairs hinted at long hours spent turning their weighty pages. Gabriel somberly informed her that he was to keep the fire burning in the grate during the day. Camille envisioned the experience of opening one of these countless volumes and sinking into a plush chair, inhaling the fragrance of aged, ink-laden paper. It was enthralling. Camille understood that the only way to make headway in this neglected house was simply to pick a spot and begin. On that initial day, she and Gabriel dusted and aired the front hall and tidied up the kitchen. Although Gabriel and the Baron had been preparing basic meals there for quite some time, a significant portion of the space required attention. Camille wasn't a culinary expert, but she found joy in restoring the kitchen's sparkle. She dispatched Gabriel to the town with a shopping list. Then, in the grand, quiet kitchen, she got to work. Unused countertops were cleared of dust, pots and pans were polished, and the cold, empty space started to feel alive once more. By the time dinner with the Baron was scheduled, she had cooked a simple roasted chicken meal. It wasn't elaborate, but she felt proud of it. With little time to freshen up, Camille returned to her room. Gabriel had rekindled the fire, and she used her pitcher and washstand to tidy up, dressing in her finest attire. As she approached the window to draw the curtains for the night, she paused and gazed out into the darkness. The courtyard lay silent, as if anticipating something. Nothing stirred, not even a bird. It seemed as though the grounds were enveloped in a cloak of silence. She carefully pulled the velvet curtains together and tore herself away from the window. There was much to discover about this place, she mused. Lighting a candle, she navigated the dimly lit hallway and descended the grand staircase. The tall doors of the dining room. The room was exceedingly spacious for just 2 individuals. It had likely hosted glamorous gatherings and elaborate formal dinners. Looking up, she admired the sparkling crystal chandelier that hung over the room like a starry canopy. Gabriel had set 2 places at one end of the lengthy table, and dinner was ready. She was the first to arrive. She didn't have to wait long. The Baron's imposing figure awkwardly appeared in the doorway. He paused and briefly nodded in greeting. Then he gestured towards the 2 place settings, indicating she should take a seat. Camille gladly sat on one of the cushioned chairs. "I see you and Gabriel have been hard at work today," the Baron remarked, raising his eyebrows at the hearty meal she had prepared. "He has carried a heavy burden as my sole assistant these past years, I'm pleased that you will be here to share some of his duties." Camille nodded, unsure of how to respond. "When he is my lord," she paused. When he shook his head, "Please, you may simply call me Antoine," he replied. "I am lord of nothing now, just the lord of this chateau and its collection of dusty relics," he joked darkly. Looking into her eyes, he said, "I apologize for the circumstances that brought you here, but I hope you will find comfort. I strive to be fair, and I am pleased to have your company." Camille nodded and briefly smiled. "Would you like me to tidy up the library tomorrow?" she inquired. "I wasn't sure if you wanted me to enter." After a moment of thought, the Baron nodded, agreeing that it would be acceptable. He then added, "Feel free to borrow any book you wish from the library. As Descartes said, reading good books is akin to conversing with the greatest minds of the past. You'll find my library to be quite extensive, housing any book you can think of. It's rather magical in that sense." Taken aback by his kind gesture and refined speech, Camille observed her employer, who appeared somewhat unfortunate as he dined. Having been at the chateau for only a day, her perspective on her situation had already begun to shift. She now found herself the mistress of a grand estate with the freedom to work as she pleased, and she had just been granted access to a vast library. Perhaps this turn of events wouldn't be as bleak as she had initially thought. Quietly contemplating her plate in the flickering firelight, she could only hear the clinking of silverware against china. Throughout the dinner, the Baron and Camille exchanged few words, finishing their meal in respectful silence. Later, as she lay comfortably in her luxurious canopied bed with crisp white sheets, Camille felt a sense of hope. This secluded estate held many intriguing secrets, and she eagerly anticipated uncovering them in due time. Rolling over onto her side, she sleepily gazed at the tightly closed drapes, shutting out the darkness of the night beyond the window. Within the walls of the chateau, a warmth emanated, and she could feel it. The following day, after tidying up the kitchen, Camille cautiously made her way to the library. Knowing the Baron was occupied in his other study, she saw an opportunity to explore the magnificent collection of books under the pretense of cleaning. With a duster in hand, she meticulously worked her way around the books and tables, attending to neglected surfaces that had gathered dust over time. Just as she was about to shift some stacked books, Antoine appeared in the doorway. "Please refrain from disturbing any stacks or opening books," he requested. Apologizing, Camille stepped back from the pile she had touched. "No need to apologize," he reassured her. "I understand it may look disorganized. I am conducting research and wouldn't want to lose my place." Then he inquired if she had selected a book for herself. She replied that she had not, and asked for his recommendations. Camille confessed that she felt inadequate to grasp such significant works, coming from a less educated background than him. Antoine smiled, gestured broadly, and remarked, "Recognizing one's ignorance is the first step to wisdom." Noticing her confusion, he winked playfully and attributed the wise saying to Socrates. Crossing the room, he retrieved a small volume from a lower shelf and handed it to her carefully. Perhaps you might enjoy some of his other musings. He believed strongly in questioning everything. Camille accepted the book with a grateful nod. As she prepared to exit the room, she hesitated, then turned back to ask a question. "Could I arrange for some villagers to tidy the gardens before winter?" she inquired. Antoine looked at her somewhat sadly and shrugged. "If Gabriel can find anyone willing to come onto the estate, you are welcome to do so. Unfortunately, most are fearful of entering the chateau grounds due to outlandish tales that have circulated about me over the years, leaving me mostly isolated." Camille furrowed her brow. "How do you endure it? Doesn't it anger you to be treated unjustly?" Le Baron gazed down thoughtfully and replied, "I was once a vain and foolish man, more handsome but blinded by my own vanity. It took a great misfortune for me to realize my errors and the disdain people hold for me. Perhaps it is just retribution for my past folly." Camille remained silent, deciding not to ask further questions that day, but resolved to uncover more about her employer's unfortunate circumstances. For now, she looked forward to delving into Socrates' writings in her room after dinner. Camille swiftly adapted to her role as the chateau's housekeeper, and even grew to cherish it. Through some persuasion, she convinced Gabriel to hire a few men from the village, who arrived at the estate one day to restore the neglected gardens, with strict instructions from Camille to protect the rosebush by the pergola, planted by Antoine's mother and of great sentimental value to him. She almost regretted bringing the village men to the house when she overheard them speaking disparagingly of Antoine. "He's a complete monster," one exclaimed loudly to the other. "Lives like an animal in there," added another. "No manners and unfit for human company." "But I'll take his money," the man concluded rudely. Camille observed Antoine standing by the window, listening to the entire conversation. She hurried to shut the window, eager to shield him from the men's cruelty. He waved her off, seemingly unperturbed. "I'm accustomed to such talk," he remarked. "It has been many years since I could socialize in society." Camille was still upset. "How can you endure such unfairness? People who don't even know you. How do you not despise them?" she inquired. He shrugged, looking thoughtfully at a stack of books on a nearby table. A great English playwright named William Shakespeare once wrote, "Not a furnace for your foe so hot that it do singe yourself by bearing good will for these unknowing people, I ease the burden on myself." Smiling and nodding at Camille, he said, "You might enjoy reading Shakespeare yourself. He wrote some excellent plays." With that, he turned back to his stack of books, leaving Camille to ponder his words and the dreary day outside. Despite the significant amount of work waiting to be done each day, Camille still found time to explore the house. As autumn settled in with its crisp days, early sunsets, and chilly evenings, she would wander the corridors with a candle, using her heavy ring of house keys to unlock the myriad closed doors that lined the halls. Most of them were bedrooms. It was evident that this country's chateau had once welcomed many esteemed guests of the nobility. Now, draped in dust sheets, One dim room after another revealed elegant four-poster beds, luxurious furniture, and dusty fabric-covered chairs. One day, she stumbled upon what seemed to be a very special room. Clearly a lady's chamber, unlike the others, it was still filled with her possessions. A graceful dressing table was adorned with jars of powder and twinkling perfume bottles in the afternoon sunlight. Elaborate wigs from decades past sat nearby on their stands, as if awaiting a ball. Upon opening the wardrobe, Camille was amazed to find a row of opulent silk dresses from the pre-revolution era. She ran her hand lightly over their delicate skirts, almost afraid they would disintegrate in her fingers. She envisioned the elegant woman who must have worn them. Upon opening the chest of drawers, she discovered it was brimming with shimmering necklaces. Inside a small velvet container rested a ring adorned with a sparkling sapphire. Camille closed the box and quietly slid the drawer shut, careful not to give the impression of stealing. With a tinge of regret, she exited the room and securely locked it once more. The contents of the drawer seemed like a gateway to happier times, and stood out as the most exquisite sight she had encountered in the house. Camille diligently penned letters to her father, which Gabriel would deliver to town during his errands. In these letters, she reassured her father that she was being treated well and found joy in her work. Before long, she was even able to send him some money. After her initial month, the Baron informed her that he could not allow her to continue working without compensation, as the damage to the rose bush had been adequately rectified. He expressed his desire for her to stay and offered her a weekly salary for her services. Camille accepted with gratitude. Serving as Antoine's housekeeper, she felt she had discovered her true vocation. Her organizational skills were put to good use, and the pleasant company and access to his remarkable library became her primary sources of happiness. Despite Antoine's reputation for being unattractive, Camille hardly noticed any change in him. She ensured his attire was well-maintained and presentable. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of a normal, handsome man in the mirror as he passed by, or his features appeared more harmonious during their conversations. However, after blinking and refocusing, she would see the same intimidating figure as before. It seemed as though the eerie aura of the chateau was playing tricks on her mind. Camille found it amusing when beggars, unaware of the estate's notoriety in her hometown, occasionally arrived at the door with the biting winter wind at their backs. In her village, beggars were typically turned away and received little assistance. The townspeople believed that those in need deserved their fate, and that hard-working individuals did not end up destitute like the beggars. Camille had anticipated that Antoine would dismiss them, but instead, he surprised her by requesting her to give the beautiful coins before their departure. Curious, Camille inquired why he displayed such generosity, especially when no one in the vicinity had shown him kindness. Once more, he cited a revered philosopher he admired, Aristotle, stating, "It is the characteristic of the magnanimous man to ask no favor, but to be ready to do kindness to others." With a tinge of regret, he confessed, "I must learn to be a more magnanimous man, because it is my past actions that led me to ruin." Although she couldn't extract further details from him at that moment, Camille longed to comprehend what had transpired in Antoine's life. Later that evening, they engaged in a pleasant conversation in the softly lit dining room while enjoying a hearty winter stew. It was then that Camille gathered her courage to inquire about Antoine's solitude at the chateau. Antoine seemed hesitant, let out a deep sigh, leaned back in his chair, and after a long sip of his drink, he began to narrate his story. "Years ago, I resided here with my mother. My father's demise in my youth led me to inherit this estate. I cherished my mother, a beautiful soul who radiated joy and kindness to all. It was her rose bush that your father stripped of its flowers." Antoine paused uncomfortably before continuing. "After my mother fell ill and passed away, I was left to fend for myself. Regrettably, I did not conduct myself well. Inexperienced and foolish, I squandered our wealth on frivolous items and extravagant parties. I neglected the estate, left debts unpaid, and failed to care for my staff as I should have. Without my mother's guidance, I spiraled into a dissolute lifestyle, devoid of value to anyone, even myself. One evening, while hosting a lavish gathering, my servant informed me of a woman seeking food and coins at the door. Engrossed in my revelry, I callously dismissed her, instructing my servant to advise her to seek employment elsewhere. However, before she could be turned away, the woman forced her way inside and proclaimed that my vanity had cursed me. She foretold a future of loneliness and suffering, revealing that only through embracing humanity could I find redemption. Perplexed, Camille furrowed her brow. Humanity? What did she mean by that? Antoine shrugged. This enigma has plagued me for years. Despite the vast array of wisdom in my library from esteemed philosophers, mathematicians, and poets, the key to my liberation remains elusive. My mind may expand, but the collective brilliance of humanity has yet to offer a solution to my plight." Camille regarded him from across the table. She could hear the light crackling of the fire punctuating the silence, and imagined him sitting before many fires for a long time without anyone to talk to. She wondered how many years he'd been trapped here in this solitary prison, turning the pages of countless books in his library, searching for redemption. Antoine smiled brightly in an attempt to break the awkward silence. "Oh well," he added. Thus, the excellent Isaac Newton said, "To arrive at the simplest truth requires years of contemplation." One of these days, I may yet find the answer lying cowled up on her bed that night. Camille felt she had finally put the pieces together. All these years, Antoine had spent his time studying, thinking, absorbing, and repenting. He was no longer a man who would refuse kindness to even the undeserving. She did wonder what else there was that he could do. Would he forever be trapped here with his books and the dusty souvenirs of the regrettable person he used to be? She hoped not, because she had really come to admire him. She pulled the covers, tied her around her chin, and gazed drowsily at the remnants of the fire glowing in the hearth. Surrounded by the silence of the house, she slept for another night. All through the crisp, deep freeze of winter, Camille and Antoine went about their lives at the chateau in pleasant companionship with Gabriel as their faithful connection to the outside world. Many of the rooms in the enormous mansion stayed locked and unused. The part of the house the trio needed for their daily activities was snug and clean, thanks to Camille's faithful management. Meals were simple but hearty. The blinding white snow piled high in the courtyard, and sometimes the bleak wind whistled in the abandoned passages. But the inhabitants of the chateau stayed close to the fireplaces, buried in their books. At last, the first signs of spring arrived with it. Camille received a letter from her father. He said her oldest sister had managed to make a marriage match, and that her wedding would take place in a couple of weeks. He asked if the Baron would consider allowing her to take some leave in order to attend the festivities at home. If so, Laurent would be pleased to come and fetch her from the estate. When Camille presented this request to Antoine, he put down his book, gazed at her with a sad smile, and said, "Of course, she must go, and she should take all the time she needs." As she thanked him for giving his permission, she once again did not see a beast looking back at her. She only saw a man. She had to blink several times to dispel the illusion. As she left the room, she paused briefly, gazed at him again over her shoulder. Then she left him to his reading, putting the moment behind her. Her journey to and from her sister's wedding was uneventful. Family greeted her with much curiosity and perhaps some newfound respect. They admired the tasteful new clothes she acquired using her salary. It was obvious that the money she was sending to them had helped secure her sister's marriage. Humble though the match might be, her family was no longer seen by the villages as being impoverished. Instead, they were viewed as stable and acceptable, thanks to her regular income. And yet, Camille felt less at home in the family cottage than she once had. Although she had been contained inside the walls of the chateau this entire time, she felt like her worldview had changed and her horizons had vastly expanded. Seated around the fire with her siblings who focused only on their own petty concerns, she felt stifled. She regretted having to leave her father again, but Camille also felt relief when he parted from her at the gates of Antoine's estate. She was ready to return to her life as mistress of the house. Her happiness, however, turned to dismay when she saw the disarray that awaited her. Gabriel answered the door eagerly, obviously delighted that she'd returned. He whispered to her that nothing had been the same since she'd left, and that the Baron was disheveled and did not leave his library. After putting away her things, Camille went straight to see Antoine. As she cautiously opened the door to the library, she found her room in a complete mess. Books were everywhere, lying open in stacks, generally tossed about. On the floor, empty drinking glasses lined the tables. Antoine sat slumped in a chair, looking as if he hadn't changed his shirt in days, and the sound of her arrival. However, he looked up with an expression of sheepish relief. Once again, in this moment, Camille felt she only saw him as a regular man, and she struggled to adjust her view. She knew logically that she was standing before an unkempt, unshaven, and rather beastly person. However, her eyes were playing tricks. It took a moment before she saw him properly again. Yes, there he was in dire need of cheering up. It only took a few days for Camille to set everything right again. Dust and neglect of a couple of weeks were easily dealt with, and the Baron's mood improved instantly upon her return. Gabriel begged her in confidence, however, to go away again. He said the Baron had sunk immediately into the most terrible melancholy, and had been completely useless about managing anything at all, including remembering to eat his meals. With spring blasting out all over the estate, it was impossible to be sad for long. Camille was overjoyed that she had taken the effort to clear the garden before winter. The courtyard looked absolutely beautiful, with the charming plantings originally designed by Antoine's mother many years ago, now shining at their best. Flowers in a variety of colors delicately presented themselves, while the birds seemed to be multiplying daily, singing sweetly in the morning, and inviting the chateau residents to enjoy the garden. Camille and Antoine began spending their afternoons reading outside in the pergola, and he often let Gabriel finish his tasks early, so they could enjoy the afternoon with friends. Camille also took pleasure in opening the windows of the stuffy mansion to air it out. Life throughout the estate started to feel fresh and new, as if the entire place had turned a corner. As summer approached, Camille received another message from her father informing her of her other sister's upcoming wedding. She was invited to attend the event. Camille felt torn. She felt obligated to be with her family for the wedding, but she couldn't bear the thought of leaving Antoine once more. Faced with this dilemma, she devised a highly unusual plan. She proposed to Antoine that he accompany her to the wedding, book a room at an inn nearby. Antoine was shocked by the suggestion. "Have you not seen how people react to me?" he asked her. Camille had anticipated this, and pointed out that her own village was far away, and people there wouldn't already have formed opinions about him based on rumors. Privately, Camille no longer saw him as a monster. She only saw the wise, kind man she had come to know. She believed that the people back home would give him a fair chance. The idea of a lord attending a village wedding didn't faze Camille. She had long ceased to see Antoine as either a beast or a baron. He resisted and declined at first, but Camille insisted she wouldn't go without him. Faced with the possibility of causing her to miss her sister's wedding, Antoine eventually relented. However, he seemed apprehensive about the idea and was in a somber mood as the preparations progressed. Camille remained determined. She sent Gabrielle to the town tailor, requesting a new, well-fitted suit for Antoine. She had noticed that he had been wearing outdated styles from decades past all this time. The current fashion trend was more refined and straightforward. He would have a respectable suit that would make him appear less like an artifact. Rooms in which we were engaged were prepared, and the carriage was cleaned. Finally, the day arrived when Gabriel bid the pair farewell on their journey. He had never witnessed the Baron leaving the estate before. He assured them that he would prevent everything from falling apart in their absence. The trip to Camille's village was swift by carriage, covering the distance in just a day of fine weather. Summer was displaying its lush beauty as the horse trotted down the forest road. The sun shone through the canopy of leaves above them, casting bright rays on the path ahead, whispering enchantingly. Initially, Antoine was silent, seemingly resisting the fact that he was accompanying Camille in public. After a few miles, however, he engaged in conversation about a book Camille had been reading. Soon, their usual lively banter resumed. Camille smiled to herself, witnessing his best qualities emerge. Observing him from the side, she could have sworn she was sitting next to a charming gentleman, content with that notion. She chose not to dispel the enchantment. Eventually, their pleasant journey came to an end. Twilight descended, and the crickets began their nightly serenade in the fields. Antoine and Camille arrived at her family's cottage and stopped the carriage. As they alighted, they were greeted by her entire family at the front door, with her 4 unmarried siblings staring rudely at them. Laurent made a greater effort to compose himself. He stepped forward and politely acknowledged Antoine, thanking him for bringing Camille and honoring them with his visit. However, Camille felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment when her brother loudly whispered something to her older sister, causing the latter to laugh. It was evident to all that they were making jokes about the Baron. Everyone felt relieved when Antoine departed for his lodgings. Camille allowed herself to be led inside, where she spent the evening conversing with Laurent and her siblings, inquiring politely about the wedding preparations. She was concerned, though, about how Antoine was faring at the inn, and hoped he was not facing mistreatment there. As she lay her head on the pillow that night, thoughts of him weighed heavily on her mind. She realized she would be relieved once they had finished the wedding and returned to the chateau, which she now considered her true home. Grim was the atmosphere when he arrived at the church the following day for the wedding. It was evident that Camille's fears had materialized. They sat in silence throughout the ceremony, both sensing the constant scrutiny from the entire congregation in the small church, making it feel even more cramped. The post-ceremony celebration took place on the village green. The gathering was modest, yet lively, with punch, cakes, and wildflowers. Amidst the cheerful ambiance, the ladies congregated in groups, delicately savoring sweets, while children frolicked across the lawn, reveling in an afternoon of play. Camille and Antoine, however, felt detached from the festivities. She stood rigidly by his side, acknowledging the villagers who had once been so kind to her. The once welcoming people who had taught her gardening and baking years ago now kept their distance, whispering amongst themselves and casting knowing glances in her direction. Not a single neighbor had a kind word for Antoine, who smiled politely but remained silent. Her family offered no support, completely ignoring the couple. As Camille and Antoine stood fervently hoping for the party to conclude, they overheard 2 men conversing nearby. "You may have money," one said with a smirk, "but he'll never persuade anyone to marry him with a face like that." The other man chuckled. "A sad state of affairs when you have to court your own maid." Those words were the final straw. Camille set down her punch and strode to the center of the gathering, announcing tersely that she had something to say and demanded everyone's attention. I persuaded the Baron to accompany me because I believed you to be good people, she declared. I was certain that his fine character and kindness would prove to all of you that he is not the monster people portray him to be. Well, I am ashamed to admit that I was mistaken. None of you are deserving of his regard. We will trouble you no longer. Let me make this clear. Antoine is a superior man to any of you. I would choose him as a companion over each and every one of you 100 times over, and that is the truth. The crowd fell into complete silence, gazing in astonishment from Camille to Antoine and back again. As she turned to face him, she witnessed a peculiar sight. In place of where he had stood, a handsome, dignified man now stood, smiling gratefully in her direction. No matter how many times she tried to refocus her vision and clear her mind, his countenance remained unchanged. The excessive facial hair, the overly pronounced features, and the imposing stature did not return. He was as handsome as any man she had ever known, and that remained unchanged. Whether it was a shift in perspective or the result of an enchantment, the other party guests carried on with their festivities as if nothing had occurred. They warmly greeted Antoine and smiled at Camille as if everything was normal. It seemed as though the embarrassing incident had never taken place. The villagers acted as if they had never had a beast in their midst. It was both puzzling and miraculous. A veil had been lifted permanently. This quiet moment of triumph marked Antoine's release from the enchantment. For years, he had sought answers in his library, delving into human wisdom. However, he had misunderstood the woman who had cursed him. The lonely decades of becoming kinder, more generous, and more forgiving had cultivated the humanity that had captured Camille's heart. This was the missing piece that had freed him from his curse. Shortly after, Camille and Antoine sat together under the pergola in his garden, admiring his mother's rose bush, which was once again blooming abundantly. Twilight descended upon the chateau, and the crickets emerged to serenade the world. As the happy couple savored the balmy summer evening, Camille observed the transformed Antoine, appreciating the handsome face that had long been hidden behind the beastly facade. As she watched, he sat up straighter and retrieved the ring she had secretly admired in his mother's dresser from his pocket. "You were the only person who took the trouble to get to know me as I really was," he said to her. Then, in his manner, he quoted from one of his many books. As Copernicus said, "In the middle of everything is the sun. You have become that sun." Winking at her, he added, "After all, I think you have adequately demonstrated that you are more than qualified to manage this chateau." Camille laughed and nodded in agreement, allowing him to slide the sparkling blue gem onto her finger. Gazing at it in wonder, she recalled the moment she had first seen it in the mysterious bedroom among the elegant dresses and other jewels. It gleamed in the sunlight, as if conveying a precious secret. She was now becoming a part of the history of this house. Before the end of the summer, Antoine and Camille exchanged their vows in the chateau courtyard, surrounded by the heavenly fragrance of the blooming rose bushes and the melodious songs of the birds from the treetops. Standing in the house's shadow, Camille looked at Antoine with a heart full of gratitude, feeling a deep sense of belonging in a place she had once found so unfamiliar. This was no longer the desolate place she had arrived at just a year ago. Through kindness, patience, and the pursuit of wisdom, she and Antoine had discovered happiness.